What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. Once again, Carm is on the case. I was just talking about how lovely it is to have her with me every Sunday night at the end of a very long week of podcasting, taking care of my children. No better way to put a bow on the week, Carm, than to sit here with my lovely mother.
Joel, go on.
So Lyle and Erik Menendez, that is what we're talking about, a very serious topic. They were convicted of the grisly 1989 shotgun murders of their parents, Jose and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez, at the family's sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. And they have been first in jail pending the trials and then in prison ever since. Small factoid, which I think I shared last time, they actually grew up most of their lives in Princeton, New Jersey. And I played tennis at the East Brunswick Racket Club with who else but Erik and Lyle Menendez. They were a lot better than me, so they were on court 1. I was on court 2. But a lot of the people who provided testimony at their first and second trials are people that I knew personally and have known of them. I wasn't close friends with them, but know a lot of people in common. So it's a small world after all. But the question now is, do they have a new shot at freedom after a bombshell revelation in a new documentary supporting the brothers' claims of sexual abuse by their dad, Jose Menendez, as well as a new letter, which is actually an old letter that has recently surfaced? Best guess to break this all down, besides Carm, we've got Sarah Azari. She is a high-profile criminal defense attorney based in Los Angeles. She has decades of experience defending complex felonies from investigation through trial in state and federal courts across the nation. Sarah has also been a media legal analyst across platforms from news to crime shows, and she's known, and she admits this, for her unfiltered, unbiased, and informative legal point of view. Unfiltered and unbiased like you, Carm. And then we've got John Della Torre. He is a licensed psychologist in Texas, Arizona, and New York State. He's also a psychological analyst for television news and court shows. He is a certified clinical traumatologist and has completed basic training as a negotiator and a mediator. And he works with some victims as well of domestic violence. The documentary, by the way, is out on Peacock right now. It is called Menendez and Menudo Boys Betrayed. Carm, you actually, by the way, there's going to be a special Patreon/YouTube member event with this one and a best guest yet to be determined on May 18th with a time yet to be determined. And you'll be there. Are you excited to host that, Carm?
I am excited.
Okay, excellent. So
I don't sound excited.
You seem very subdued, Carmen.
I'm abnormally relaxed.
Yeah, that's always, whenever she's too relaxed, I think something is wrong. I forced her to watch a documentary on chimpanzees as well. I give her assignments on Netflix. It's an amazing documentary. And Carmela came away with it by saying she was sad because chimps have difficult lives in the rainforest protecting themselves and their children. So maybe that's why she's a tad morose tonight. But Carm, you watched this documentary.
About the Menendez, not the chimpanzee.
Correct, about the Menendez. Back to the Menendez. Very good for delineating that. What was your takeaway, Carm, from this documentary?
Well, it would be like starting at the very end to bring up what my takeaway was, because I did watch all the episodes. It's a what is it called?
True crime docuseries.
Docuseries. That's what it is. And at the end, as a totally lay person, I felt that there was not enough reason or cause from this documentary to have another trial or to
Very interesting.
make other.
Let me ask you this. Did you believe that this person from Menudo, Roy, whose last name?
Moncello.
Yes, Rossello. Did you feel that he was credible? Did you believe him?
He was credible, 100%. I felt, my intuition said he was credible. but 99% of what he was talking about was accusing, what is the name of the...
Jose Menendez, the father.
No, it's not Jose Menendez. It's the person who was taking... 1 second, I'll tell you in 1 second.
As she leaves through her notes, Sarah. So, Sarah, you have it.
Just let me finish this, okay? 1 second. The guy who was the manager of the Menudo band,
whose name I do not know.
He's accusing, and other teammates are accusing this agent, and his name is, I think, Diaz, last name, but they are accusing him, and it's very credible, but it only tangentially touches on Jose Menendez.
Now, did they accuse the manager of sexual abuse as well?
Only the manager, sexual abuse, very clearly over an extended period of time. And as the usual story, it was because of the poverty of this Roy Rossello as a 14-year-old child.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know this, but Menudo
went along with it because his mother was raising alone children, and
Menudo had something like 30 band members and all. Ricky Martin was one of them.
No. Over a period of time.
And a lot of them were, in fact,
maybe we let them
sexually abused. Sarah, I know you're very interested in this case, and you and I are somewhat similar in age. What got you interested in this? I mean, this is the first trial was actually predates OJ, and then there was a second trial after the OJ Simpson trial. But what piqued your interest to begin with in this?
Well, first of all, I think the conclusion from what you said about the tennis club and stuff is that you're bougie. You're bougie like the Menendez brothers, right? You were playing tennis at the same club.
I'm what I call a blue collar tennis player. I grew up in a very blue collar sort of town, but I played tennis.
But what I always remember, the image of these brothers and their little tennis, uniforms. I mean, that's sort of what sticks out to me when I think about this trial. But OJ and Menendez were the two trials that I was absolutely fascinated by at a time where, I mean, I watched the trial, I remember everything, but I was not a lawyer. And I always, in the context of Alec Murdaugh's trial, I would always say that, Alec Murdaugh is like the third trial that I've been as fascinated by, except the difference is I'm a lawyer, so I'm looking at it from a different perspective. But, the writ that two attorneys, one of them being Mark Garagos, who's a friend of mine, had filed with LA County Superior Court has a lot of meat to it. So I disagree with your mom because it's not just about the Menudo band member, Rossello, and his allegation that has now come up. I think there were two, and I have not watched the documentary, so full disclosure, but according to the writ, the documentary reveals that Rossello was essentially anally sodomized by Jose Menendez on 2 occasions. Now, whether you believe him or not is a different story, but it does corroborate that Jose Menendez was an abuser, was a child predator, and it's not the only evidence that this writ is raising as sort of newly discovered evidence since the convictions. It's also saying, and this, to me, this is the more key piece of evidence that is direct as to the brothers, is that Andy Cano, who's now, I think, deceased, but is a cousin of Erik and Lyle's, there was a letter that Erik wrote to him 8 months before the murders, very clearly saying that he just doesn't know when it's going to happen next. He feels like his father is going to walk in the room any minute, clearly alluding to this assault, ongoing sort of abuse by his father. So these are two very big revelations. And frankly, having written writs of habeas corpus and seen many of them, this has a lot more meat than what I'm usually used to seeing. The question is how is the court going to view this evidence in the context of self-defense? Because, and please tell me if I need to shut up and I'm running my mouth.
But not at all. I just think that, well, 2 things. Carmela's long storied career as an attorney. She seems to differ with you, having never gone to law school. But what is a writ of habeas corpus? Some people are not going to know what that is to begin with.
Yeah, so this is basically a fundamental right that we have according to the Constitution and also each state's constitution, that essentially protects us from unlawful detentions. So it's the last resort. It means that you have gone through the appellate courts, you've gone up to the Supreme Court of the state, obviously, and now your fallback is this habeas corpus writ. And so there's different factors or bases that you could bring this writ for, one of them being newly discovered evidence. And of course, the prosecution has an opportunity to respond to it. And then the court would hold an evidentiary hearing to essentially determine whether there's enough there to release you. I don't want to say it's based on fairness factors, but it's not based on an appellate record. So it's not like they're going to go through, errors that maybe the jury made or the judge made, which is what an appeal is about. This is more about wrongfully detaining a body. That's why it's writ of habeas corpus in Latin meaning body, for a period of time that should be released. So there is that sort of fairness element to it that is not really present in a strictly in an appellate process. And I think there's a couple things that could happen if this evidentiary hearing is held and then the judge looks further into the credibility of the claims that the writ makes. They could be released. Their sentence could be reduced to what? I mean, they've already almost done 30 years. So I would think that the relief would be to release them. So it's very, very critical. And I think, what the court has to determine is this trial number 1 versus trial number 2. That's really at the crux of their claim. They're saying in trial number 1, there were critical witnesses who corroborated Lyle and Erik's testimony that they were victims of abuse and that they were not saying they didn't shoot the parents. They admitted to that. They were saying this isn't murder, it's voluntary manslaughter because we have an imperfect self-defense. An imperfect self-defense is basically, regular self-defense is any reasonable person would have shot and killed the victim, right? Imperfect self-defense is no, it's actually unreasonable, but you had an honest personal belief that you had to do that to protect yourself. That's what we're dealing with here. And I'm very interested in hearing Dr. Della Torre on the issue of, I see this as akin to the battered women syndrome and the idea that a battered woman might turn around and kill her spouse or partner, not in that moment where they think they're going to get hit or there's going to be violence, but just based on an accumulation of years in history of abuse. And that's how I see Kyle and Erik's claims. In trial number 2, when they took all the critical witnesses out, so there was no corroboration of the abuse, guess what? The DA got up and said, don't buy the abuse excuse. Can you just imagine if any prosecutor in the country made that argument today? Don't buy the abuse excuse. I mean, we're all about, protecting victims today. We're, still going on with the Me Too thing. It's unbelievable what a difference that made. The first trial, the jury was hung because the issue was, is it murder or manslaughter? They were hung. And the second trial, both brothers were convicted. So that was critical evidence.
Yeah. So Dr. John Della Torre, to you, to Sarah's point, is this akin in some way to battered wife syndrome, but with children being abused by their father, and they just merely, snap, for lack of a better clinical term?
Well, it's important to remember that no one ever just snaps, right? That doesn't happen. There's a buildup of emotional distress that occurs. So that doesn't happen. I think the real problem that we're running into revolves around the mens rea associated with each of these crimes, whether it's murder or manslaughter. When we're thinking about battered women, I have no problems connecting the two, right? This is someone being sexually abused, similar to someone experiencing domestic and intimate partner violence. I don't have a problem with linking those two. I don't think they're quite the same, but if we want to sort of think about psycho-legally, right, then yes, let's go ahead and lump them together. But it doesn't change the mens rea associated with the murder or a manslaughter charge, right? So purposeful, knowing, reckless, negligent. The issue that we're running into is that the person being abused wanted the other person dead, the abuser dead. So I think that's where you probably did need to stick to a self-defense claim or some kind of diminished capacity claim that they were somehow temporarily insane, right? Or something like that. So I think, was there a defense there where they could utilize the abuse? I think there was. I think the problem ended up being that the psychologist that they had this cockamamie reason as to why all of this stuff was like now being revealed. Am I linking the two? Yeah, I can absolutely do that. But I still think you run into the problem that even if a jury believes them and says, okay, yeah, you were abused, but you didn't act recklessly or negligent, like you still acted that way. You still acted like that. So you're probably still going to get convicted of those kinds of things. So I think you needed to take a step further and do an affirmative defense and use the abuse and just overwhelm the jury with evidence documenting that the abuse, so that they say, no, yeah, you're not guilty of any of these crimes. You either diminished capacity or you were insane or something like that.
Carm?
My point in the very beginning was that Roy Rossello talked a lot about the abuse, the ongoing abuse by his by the band's agent, but he only told one story of being in the home of the Menendez home, and he tells the story that Jose Menendez, the father, gave him a glass of wine, and even though he was only 13, he made him drink this glass. He says, drink it, it's an expensive wine, drink it down. And then after that, he remembers going through a corridor and waking up in a hotel. In other words, as a lawyer, I don't know if he proved that anything happened. He said after that he was bleeding and he wasn't feeling well, but I don't know if that part stands, strong enough.
I need karma on my jury when I defend people on abuse charges. I totally get that. That's a good point. I just think that when you're dealing with children and the trauma that is associated with sexual abuse, and when they say I had pain, I had bleeding, this happened not once but twice, where these sort of weird circumstances occurred involving this person, and then you have all these other witnesses who'd already testified claiming that they had witnessed not sexual abuse but just abusive behavior by Jose Menendez. When that evidence came in, the prosecution could not argue he is not an abusive man, which they did in the second trial because that evidence did not come in. So the like what Dr. Delatorre said, I mean, maybe it is that you're overwhelming the jury with this idea that the defendants are actually victims, not defendants, and that sort of clouds maybe some of their deliberation on the real issue. But I think it's important that there is a theory of imperfect self-defense. That's why we have that. It may not be reasonable to everybody, but it was reasonable to them. And the question was, were they being honest about that belief or that fear? And when you have those other witnesses coming in and corroborating their testimony, then it's, at least there was a split amongst the jurors. But when you pull those witnesses out, obviously you get, a slam dunk unanimous guilty verdict. And so, look, I think the writ by Garagos and Gardner is saying there's really one poignant issue that was before the juries in both of these trials, and that was there sexual abuse of Lyle and Erik? I don't know that I 100% agree that was the only issue. I think there's a second part to that issue, and that is, even given that the jurors may have believed that there was abuse as to both Kyle and Lyle. Erik and Lyle.
Yeah.
Kyle and Erik.
Erik and Lyle. Erik and Lyle. That was, what about the reasonableness of their, or unreasonableness but honest,
of their belief, that they had to kill the parents. And, to Dr. De La Torre's point, that's exactly what the prosecution argued, that there was premeditation, that they wanted the money, that there was wealth involved. They went on some, I remember, spending sprees.
There was a spending spree. Yeah, there was this big spending spree. I told this story last time, which is kind of interesting, obviously, in retrospect. But again, we had some mutual friends, and I'll never forget the story where some of my friends who were friends with them were at their party at their home in Princeton, and they had a white rug in like the entranceway, and they had a huge party when the parents were away, as you do when you're in high school, and someone spilled red wine, and it was either Lyle or Erik, and their reaction was such an overreaction. They were like, "You don't understand. My dad's going to kill me." Like they were literally scared for their lives. Not not a, "Oh my God, my parents are going to kill me." It was like, "Oh my God, my dad will kill me." And I remember that sticking out in my mind. We're going to get into all these details throughout this hour, but John De La Torre, we have the best community in all of true crime, and they're already sending tons of questions our way. So Sonny Tanner, right out of the box, and this is a tough one, I'm sure, for you to answer, but for the doctor, did killers relive the act and feel okay, or did they file it away, or are they haunted for a period of time after? I mean, these guys killed, they're different than, I guess, the type of killer that Brian Kohberger is suspected of being or alleged to be. But in regards to the Menendez brothers, how would you answer this question here? Can you?
In regards to the Menendez, that's a hard question, because here's something that's really gonna blow Sonny's mind. There are some killers that not only relive the act, they masturbate to ejaculation to it while it's playing in their head. That's their sexual fantasy. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about some of these individuals, and we can even talk about Brian Kohberger too, I'm not entirely convinced that they are remembering the event, number one, at all. And number two, they're not remembering the event as if it's to be glorified. Not entirely convinced that that's really what's happening, particularly with the Menendez brothers. I think if we are to assume that they were abused pretty horrifically and decided that they were going to take the law into their own hands because the law wasn't helping them for whatever reason, then they may feel justified, but no one would want to remember that then, because it's not a source of glory for them. It's something that they felt that they had to do in order to keep themselves safe. These individuals would most likely try to do what they can to forget it. Maybe not forget, but certainly put it in a place where they're not thinking about it all that much.
So for full disclosure, I did speak today with the producer and the director of this documentary, who's actually from Miami. Her name is Mary Louise, and she gave me some kind of good information. They're not able to come on right now because of some legal issues that are still ongoing, and obviously with what's going on with Mark Garagos and that habeas corpus that he filed. But she did say on the record to me that cases of patricide are extremely rare and triggered by one of two things: mental illness or horrible abuse. If Erik and Lyle Menendez had been 18 and 20-year-old young women who had been raped and threatened by their father since they were 5 years old, would the system have shown them mercy after they served 20 years, 25 years, 30 years? What about that, Sarah? If they were Lolita and Erika Menendez, would this be a different story right now?
Lolita is better than
Lolita, yeah.
I mean, look, I think what changed that for us was the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. The idea that victims of abuse or abuse does not, choose the victim based on gender, and that a man could also be a victim of abuse. I think it doesn't matter what side you took in that trial. I think it was pretty evident that it was a toxic relationship and that the abuse worked both ways. And so, again, I think had these boys been tried today, it would be very different. That, number one, I don't think that any court would even remotely try to justify not admitting this corroborating evidence by way of witnesses, let alone to allow a prosecutor to argue, don't buy the abuse excuse. And I think that we are in a different place where we have a broader definition of what abuse looks like, that it's not just violence, it's also mental abuse, that it extends to men, not just women. So I think we're just in a different time, and I think some of that is, they're probably banking on that before the court.
Baby doll chiming in, a friend of the show. Carm looks beautiful. You have no idea what I have to spend on lighting and makeup. She demands it. She absolutely demands it before coming here. Back to Neri Yanklin, the director of this film. She has said that more than 35 family and friends, because there's a couple of vocal family members who say keep these boys in prison, but more than 35 family members and friends have come forward to say openly that they knew these boys were being sexually abused by their father, including Kitty's aunt and niece, that is the mother. John, as a broader question, what does it do to a family structure when little kids are being sexually abused? I mean, does the entire family dynamic come crashing down, because it seems like family members are at odds with themselves all these years later?
I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer, because my instinct is to tell you this, that if sexual abuse was happening in the family, then there was never a secure family structure that was in the household at all. We have some communities that would sweep the crime under the rug. They never tell anybody. It would just be a secret that everybody knew. Could it shatter families? I think it shatters families when someone doesn't want to hear it, right? So if people know that it's happening and someone has come out and said, I'm tired of this happening, I'm going to call it out, I think it only shatters the people that want to keep it a secret. I think for the most part, there was never a secure family if sexual abuse is occurring within it. And so that puts me in a very difficult position, because what I'm saying is that people always know. And that can be very difficult for some people to hear, because it makes it seem like I am saying that we'll just genderize it, that the mother is allowing sexual abuse to occur. And I don't think that. What I'm saying is that there are times and situations in which the manipulation and coercion that go into sexually abusing a child is being used in a form against the co-parent, to ensure that the co-parent isn't going to come out and say something against the abuser. So it's not that I think people condone it. It's that I think everyone is being abused and everyone is being manipulated and coerced. It's happening in different ways. And so it only shatters people who want to keep it silent.
Don't you think that, I mean, I've had both. So there's two cases that there's one type of case I don't take at all, which is animal abuse. And then child molestation cases, I really vet them, because there are cases where there's a dynamic, there's a step parent potentially, there's, reasons and motivations why the child is set up to fabricate allegations. But then there are clearly certain instances where the abuse is very real. So I'm very careful about which ones I turn down, which ones I take. But not too long ago, well, actually it's been a while now, maybe 10 years ago or so, I ended up representing a guy. At the time when I took the case, I thought that it was just a bunch of baloney, that his daughters had made up allegations of sexual abuse. Turned out to be very real. He himself had been, it was that cycle of abuse. He himself had been molested as a child by a family member, and he was very clearly having full intercourse with his daughters, biological daughters, when they were turning 8. And it was just going on every other day, all the time. The mother, to me, was complicit in it, because I don't know whether she didn't want to know or what, but she came to the preliminary hearing and lied and said that the girls are just mad at their father and they're making all this up. It's all fabricated.
Sure. And what I'm going to say, just off the top is that, yeah, there are absolutely some women who would sell their children off and, let them be sexually abused just for whatever reason. That's absolutely true.
Well, in that case, it was because the husband this was a, low income Hispanic family. The husband was the breadwinner. She didn't want her husband to go to jail for a long time.
Right. So then is she complicit, or is she in a way is she in a position where she's being economically coerced into not
fair enough.
Not giving this guy up.
Coerced, but not protecting her children nonetheless, right?
I mean, but yeah, no. And again, it's one of those things where I want everybody to understand that I never condone abusive behaviors, and I believe everyone is making a choice when they allow abusive behaviors to happen to people that they are supposed to protect. But we also have to recognize that some of these individuals who are supposed to protect other people are also being coerced in ways that we don't quite understand, because we're looking at it. Well, you're only abused if you're physically abused, or you're sexually abused, or you're emotionally abused. But there are other ways that you can abuse someone that aren't those kinds. We need to recognize those times as well and apply it to our calculus when we're trying to figure out who's actually complicit. And the only person that I'm ever going to say is absolutely complicit is the person who did the abusing.
Carm, you're a fabulous mother. You raised a fantastic son. Mediocre daughter, but a fantastic son.
I have to tell you, in the case of the Menendez,
I couldn't even get the question out.
No, because
Go
I'm
ahead.
not interested.
Go ahead.
In the case of the Menendez situation, it wasn't economic coercion. It was a much more difficult thing to deal with. The wife was allegedly on drugs, and not heavy drugs, but tranquilizers and alcohol. And she was a weak person, and he was the head of RCA, and he ruled with, ran RCA with an iron fist, and he ran his family with an iron fist. And I was just checking, when the day he was murdered, he was only 45-years old. So he was a strong, energetic, young male. And he was in total control over the family, and even over the Menudo, who he managed and promoted and they got records for RCA. He was controlling them also. And when there was a lawsuit against abuse of the Menudo boys, they really shot the person who complained. It was a journalist who, at the time when the Menudo were very popular, a journalist came out and accused them of sexually abusing the boys, and the journalist was destroyed. And during this,
they went after that target. But my question to you, Carm, was going to be: do you think Kitty Menendez was complicit by turning 100%. A blind eye? Yes,
100%. She didn't want to see what she was seeing, and she didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't want to deal with it. She was one of those very disgustingly weak people.
And John Della Torre, sexual abusers like Jose Menendez, what part of this is a quote unquote sexual experience, and what part of it is a control issue? Because as Carmela just alluded to, this guy was a very high level music executive running a company. He was a Cuban immigrant who came here. He grew up culturally different, for sure, in a communist country where they do rule with an iron fist. And then he got here. What? No. What?
Okay, forget.
She likes to cut into my questions here.
Right.
So, I mean, to you, John, what part of this was control, and what part of it was just utter perversity on his part?
My answer to that is yes. Right. Right. Because I can't get, there's no, like, it's 50% power and 50% sex. I can't give it. And that wouldn't be accurate either. Because
but is there an element of both? Is there an element?
There's always an element of both, right? There's an element of attention, there's power seeking, there's control, there's revenge, right? There's all different kinds of reasons that people engage in misbehavior. That's kind of what we just give an umbrella term to any kind of inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to sexual abuse, yeah, it's about power, but it's also about sex as well. And so what I think the better question is what was the justification that he was giving himself to engage in these abusive behaviors? Because it's always going to be about power and it's always going to be about sex. I mean, I can't give you a percentage because it's 100% both. But I think what really would have been interesting for me to hear is if he's engaged in these behaviors, what justification did he have? Was it just I'm owed this because I give my kids money and I give all of these other kids, record deals and stuff like that. I'm owed this. So then that tells us more about how much power was the dominant force in terms of his abuse. If it was just that I'm teaching these guys how to be men, right? This is how we express sexuality. Then that tells us more about that it was about sexual gratification. So there's more to learn from the justifications and rationalizations that people use than whether or not it's just about power or sex, because it's always about power and sex.
And I probably should have done this within the first 10 seconds. I'll do it now. But Laura says, "Hi, Dr. John. I watch you on Court TV," followed by "Like the glasses, Sarah." Even though she took them off, I like the glasses too. And they are gone. They are no longer on either her head or her face. But there they go. Quick. So just a quick background, because not everyone is super up to date on this case. The Menendez brothers are currently serving life sentences without the possibility of parole after they were convicted of these first-degree murders for fatally shooting both their parents. That happened in 1989. And at trial, they did, as we said, admit to the shooting, but claimed that the killings followed years of sexual abuse and sought a lesser charge of manslaughter, which the trial judge did not allow the jury to consider. The theory of defense at both trials was very straightforward. Neither Erik or Lyle denied the shooting. Again, they said it was manslaughter. The state's theories in both trials was also straightforward. They said that they were lying about the sexual abuse, that it had never happened, and that they had killed their parents, not in self-defense, but to inherit their money. So there you go. Now, Sarah, I know that you know Mark Garagos, and I think you used to work with him. But so he filed this petition along with another attorney named Cliff Gardner. Mm-hmm. And they basically say that had jurors in this motion that they filed, had jurors seen the letter Erik Menendez wrote to Andy Cano and learned that Jose Menendez anally raped and orally copulated a 13 or 14-year-old boy in 1984, the prosecutor would not have been able to argue that the abuse never happened. So the argument was made that the abuse never happened, and we're going to get to this letter in a second. How does this writ of habeas corpus now navigate the court system? Does it move along quickly? Does it move along faster because they're so high profile, because Mark Garagos is attached to it? What is the fate of this writ now that is in motion?
Sadly for Mark, there's no Garagos priority here. It's still going to move forward the way Joe Schmo's writ would move forward. But the state's theory was the same. The defense theory was the same. What was different was the evidence. That's what, got them convicted. And so now they're saying, look, not only you should not have excluded the evidence that came in the first trial, because obviously it made a difference, but now we have additional corroboration that, this is Erik writing a letter. So it's from the defendant before the murders to a person that testified. So it's even more important than the Menudo allegations, which is really someone else. It shows a pattern and scheme. But the letter to the cousin has to do exactly with one of the defendants and the abuse that he suffered at the hands of Jose Menendez. The next step is going to be an evidentiary hearing that's going to get set. I'm not exactly sure how quickly, but I would think that, number one, the DA has to have an opportunity to respond to this writ, and then the court will have a full-fledged hearing. There's going to be references and I think they're cited in the writ as well. Parts of the transcript of both trials will be referenced heavily. And then they'll also put on testimony. I mean, I would imagine maybe Rosello would testify. Andy Cano, the cousin that received the letter from Erik, is deceased, I understand. But the circumstances around how that letter was found, I think the mother found it or something. She might have to testify, because one of the issues with a writ is timeliness. The idea that, how long did you wait before you bring this writ? How long were you aware of the newly discovered evidence, and did you sit on that? And there's a whole section in this writ where Gardner and Garagos really get into, the attempts that the brothers made. They were aware that this letter was there. They were trying to find it. They then, asked family members to look for it, and then finally they found. So they've laid out a timeline, which I don't know it didn't seem unusually delayed to me. But that's something the court will also consider, because the court just could go very technically and say it's just too late. Although habeas corpus writ can be brought at any time, it still needs to be brought not too long after the additional evidence is discovered.
Is there a statute of limitation on this? Or
No.
Okay. So legally,
wait a second.
Yeah.
I have to say this because Roy Rosello now filed a criminal case
Against
a few months ago.
Against
and
who?
Against
the
manager.
Okay, got it.
It's killing me that I didn't write down the manager's name.
But you did write down Lyle older, Erik younger. I'm looking at your notes, Carm. You're on top of it.
Yeah,
you're on top of it.
Thank you.
So you do have that.
The point is before he filed a criminal case, this guy Roy Rosello went to all the ex-Menudo children who are now middle-aged men, and he had a conversation with them. That's part of the documentary, and they all made a commitment that they will testify. So that
what would they be testifying to, Carm?
That's my problem. That they would be testifying that
but that's to the manager.
The manager,
not
the
Jose
manager
Menendez.
abused them on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. So,
but at the same time, they said that the manager, when Jose Menendez was the head of RCA, they lived in
Princeton.
In Princeton, and he brought out this one guy Rosello, the one that he lived with, really, when they were touring and so forth.
He brought him to the home.
And he brought him and he offered him up to Jose Menendez. And so that will probably come out.
Well, you know what? This is the analogy I would draw is with the Cosby case. Remember in Cosby in Pennsylvania, when they prosecuted him, there was the woman that was the accuser where the statute was still good on her. But there were a slew of women who were bad act witnesses whose statutes had run, but the court allowed them. And I think that was bad too. That's why one of the reasons why his conviction was overturned. There were just one too many women came in who did not have their day in court on their claims, but they certainly were allowed to testify to show a pattern of conduct by the defendant. So Rosello at a criminal trial being the victim of Diaz can certainly, or the DA can move to present testimony of all those other boys who may also say they were abused or they witnessed abuse, but maybe those claims are not viable because the statute is run on them, but they can certainly come in as prior bad act witnesses to some, not everybody. Obviously there's a limit under the code, but the court can determine the relevance, the prejudice, etc., and allow them to testify. But I don't think that in the writ hearing, the evidentiary hearing for the writ for Menendez brothers, that that those guys could come in and testify, because that's got to do with the manager, not with Menendez, Jose Menendez. But I do think Rosello is a relevant witness because it contradicts directly the DA's closing argument that Jose Menendez would never be violent. He was not a predator. He was not an abuser. I mean, so someone who allegedly, I mean, this is an accusation right now, but he experienced abuse at the hands of Jose Menendez. So I think he would be relevant, but not the other Menudo band members.
Yeah. And to that point, Laura Waldy asked this question. Sarah, this is a legal standpoint here. Jose Menendez is now deceased. He has been for many years. How can new allegations that he abused other boys stick if he is now gone? It's just their word against his word, which there is no word.
Right. Well, that's where you look to corroboration, right? And so that's much like with Lyle and Erik, the DA was, arguing there's no corroboration. There's no corroboration. You can't believe them. You can't believe their testimony. Well, in the first trial, there was corroboration. That's why the jury was hung. And now we have even more corroboration, with this letter that he had written to his cousin. So it really is about corroboration. I mean, you have a deceased victim, so obviously the victim's not going to be in court, or the perpetrator, and so I think it's gonna be about prior bad act witnesses, other people that he abused, and essentially this parallel between Menendez and Menudo, the Rosello.
And we got Tali watching in the Holy Land, near and dear to Carmela's heart, and we've got Western Australia in the house. So this letter, let's get to this letter. So Erik sent this letter to his cousin, Andy Cano. Cano died of a drug overdose in the mid-2000s. So there's sadness throughout this family, actually. And in this letter, Dr. John Delatorre, the first part of it, he says, this is now Erik writing the letter, I guess, to himself. Or, I'm sorry, to the cousin. And he says to the cousin, I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. He's so overweight that I can't stand to see him. What do you make of that? I mean, it's a little, the overweight part. I reread that. I was like, wait, what does this have to do with anything? But obviously there is fear and trepidation, and the letter goes on. But that part of it, what do you make of it?
Well, my initial thought when I heard it, in particular, the curious part with the overweight thing is that he's being crushed, when he's being abused by his father. So the overweight thing is about the pressure that he's physically feeling with having someone on top of him. But yeah, people are going to think whatever they want to think about the Menendez brothers, but the reality is that this letter is very indicative of someone who has been sexually abused. It's not uncommon to hear or to see things written like this from sexual abuse victims to some family member, to a friend, to some kind of confidant, where they're describing the physical sensations that are going on with regard to the abuse that they're experiencing.
And just to show the court of public opinion among STS Nation is split, Old Lady Snoop says, haven't those men been through enough? Free them. Then give them tons of support, because it's not just a different world. It's like a different planet now from the 80s. Freedom will still be tough. Followed by this from MC Spunky, no justification for killing parents. None. The letter goes on, John Delatorre, Erik writing to his cousin, I never know when it's going to happen, meaning the abuse, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind. I know what you said before, but I'm afraid, obviously they were talking about this previously, you just don't know Dad like I do. He's crazy, and he warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. So there you see the control aspect where he was basically reprimanded, told not to say anything to his brother. So, I don't know. Let's say you were an expert witness here, John. What would your testimony be about this?
Well, my first testimony is going to have to include a full evaluation of the Menendez brothers, because I'm not going in there with just a letter. I'm sorry. Even though I may think the veracity of the letter is accurate, given the context with which the alleged behavior is, I'm not walking in there only with just that. If you're asking me to just outline, are these things similar to what other sexual abuse victims experience and how they document what has gone on with them, then yeah, I can absolutely say that. But if you want me to say that these things are absolutely indicative that the writer of this letter experienced sexual abuse, then I need to speak to the writer of this letter, and I need to know exactly what it was that was going on as to, you know, what prompted this letter in particular. How many other letters are there? How many other different people are there? Did he experience some kind of retribution if the father found out that he had written any of these letters? There's so much that goes into why people do what they do that I'm not just going to take a letter as face value.
But I don't think, John, you need to take the letter as face value. I'm just thinking from the perspective of a lay person on the jury who doesn't have your expertise. They hear from the brothers about the abuse. They hear from family members. This Andy Cano being one of them, talking about what Erik or Lyle, I think he testified about Lyle, had shared with him. And then you have the letter. And then you have the other witnesses who are testifying about his control and violence besides sexual abuse, about how, you know, he would punch them and, you know, tell them to man up, and mother would swear him to secrecy. I mean, when you put all the pieces together, I think for a juror, I think it's clear that at least that they're not lying.
So what you would do with me in that scenario is you're asking me all the different science related questions.
Right.
You're asking me all the research related questions. You're asking, Dr. Delatorre, how many sexual abuse perpetrators have you treated and evaluated?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How many victims? Right? So that it's never just focused on Menendez himself. That's your job during closing argument.
Right.
But when you're giving when I'm giving direct and you're asking me these questions and you're letting me just recount all of that stuff, you're wanting me to say the narrative that makes the most rational sense to the jury.
Correct.
And that's giving like a bird's eye view.
Right.
Just general kinds of stuff. But if you're asking me, Dr. Delatorre, you evaluated Erik Menendez. Why did he write this letter? That's a different question, and I need more to it.
Yeah, and I may not want that out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, but more generally, just about, you know, that the idea that very simply that, you know, you've got the defendant saying a story, and so of course the prosecutor can get up and say, "Oh, don't believe them. It's an excuse, whatever. It's BS." But then you suddenly have all this other corroboration. That's where, you know, it becomes harder to argue that they're bullshitting. You know.
Yeah. Carm?
I have a question for Dr. Delatorre. According to some of the things I read, or I don't know where I picked this up, that the two brothers did not communicate with each other. And when they were already a little bit older, it was the younger one, Erik, who was abused. And the older was at that moment not abused like on a nightly or 2 nights basis. It was younger. And they did not talk to each other about this. Is this common in these cases where I know in families you don't talk and you have the family secret, but this particular aspect of being sexually abused by your father and not talking to each other about it?
You know, here's the thing. Is that they couldn't just be scared of sexual abuse. They were also scared of physical abuse. Mm-hmm. Do sexual abusers have preferences, meaning an age group that they prefer? Yeah, they absolutely do. Not all of them, but most of them do. So is it possible then that an abuser moved out of one victim because that victim aged out of his preference? Yeah, absolutely, that's possible. And the reason why you wouldn't then talk to one another, right, when you know that your brother is now going to start taking on this abuse, you don't talk to him because you know that you're going to get the crap beat out of you if your father found out that the two of you have been speaking. So it forces a silo effect where you're forced to not reveal what's coming, because what may happen as a consequence of that information being revealed is much worse than if you just kind of experience the abuse in that way.
According to what I read, is that shortly before they murdered their parents, they confided in each other. A few days before, they opened up to each other. The younger brother couldn't keep it in anymore and confided in the older one. The older one this is, I mean, it's not verified, but this is the narrative. The older one called out the mother, and then they had this very clear sense that they are going to be killed, because the father didn't threaten of beating them up or take away their inheritance. The father threatened of killing them. And this narrative, does it make any sense psychologically for these types of situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where Sarah would put me on the stand and said, Dr. Delatorre, isn't it possible then that the fear that they would die at the hands of their father, couldn't that then compel them to engage in some kind of defensive act, whether it looks pre-planned or not? Isn't it possible? My answer is going to be sure. It is absolutely possible that someone could fear so much that they pre-plan engaging in some kind of violent act in order to not have some kind of, violent act occur upon them. Yeah, absolutely. That's possible. But does that comport with the law? And that's where that's where Sarah's got to come in and start maneuvering that argument around. But what we're really talking about, and let's go back to the analogy of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, timing becomes the problem. When was the last time they were abused? When was the last time they were threatened with assault? The longer that time frame is in between that threat versus them engaging in the act, the more likely it is that the jury's going to believe that it was premeditated murder and not self-defense.
By the way, people are wondering
that it would be unreasonable, that
right.
unreasonable to fear.
Yeah.
And that's why you have voluntary manslaughter as the drop down based on imperfect self-defense.
Yeah.
That is an issue. And the prosecutors argued, like, we don't go around killing child molesters. I mean, we don't condone it. We prosecute them, but we don't.
Except in Florida now.
Well, that's Florida. A lot happens in Florida.
So people are going to be wondering about this letter. Just to clarify it, this cousin, whose last name is Cano, he died of a drug overdose in 2003. The letter was written from Erik to him in 1989. It was given by his mother, this guy Cano's mother, to a journalist in 2018, who then passed it on to the brother's former counsel. That's why it is surfacing in 2023. Real quick, I just want to get STS Nation in here. So Sarah says, I remember the trial and their tears were real. It seemed like they showed true emotion, not just sadness for themselves because they were going to prison. It's interesting how split people are. Triple Crown writes, could the sons have been writing such info to set up a narrative, basically setting up the stage to murder both parents down the line? That seems excessive, although it's something the state might try to argue if this ever went back to court. And then this comment here, so awful. Just think if the Menendez brothers had cell phones back then and could provide proof and prosecute their dad instead of killing him and their mother, who was supposed to protect him. But Sarah Azari, back to you. So during this first trial at 93, Cano testified back then that when Erik was just 13, he came to Cano, the cousin, and told him that his father, Jose, was touching and massaging his genitals, and he wanted to know if that was normal. And then he testified that when he proposed, asking his own mother, Cano's own mother, about the situation, Erik swore him to secrecy and made him say, I'm not going to tell anyone about the alleged sexual abuse. It is hard to wrap our minds around this, and you mentioned this, but I mean, what a crazy thought to think that all this was part of the evidence, and a judge basically directed jurors not to listen to any of it, to basically tune out all this sexual abuse. It's an insane thought in 2023, right?
Right. In 2023, it is. I don't know what the basis was of and I'm not saying OJ had anything to do with it, but OJ Simpson was acquitted between these two trials, right? So there was that climate. That's where we were at. And no, it definitely, it was almost like the trial number one was a test run, and the admission of this evidence, ended up in favor of the defendants. And I'm not saying the judge was carrying water for the prosecution, but they very much sort of teamed up to keep this evidence out. And that's exactly got the result that the prosecution wanted. So Cano testified in the first trial, not the second trial, among other witnesses. And I think that's what really Garagos and Gardner, I think is his name, have going for them, is that the proof's in the pudding. Look how important this issue was, that a jury hung on both brothers the first time and then found them both guilty of murder the second time. And now we have this additional layer of corroboration. So they've also done a lot of, they are very rehabilitated, from what I read over the years, the stuff they've done while they're in custody, besides just being model inmates. Again, that's not really a factor here, but I think, any judge that hears this obviously has all that in his mind too. It's hard to deny that.
But I think it was also almost like a comedy of error in my perception, because first of all, they had this psychologist, and the younger one, Erik, couldn't keep. The way they found out that they committed the murder was, they would have probably found it out, the police, different ways, but the psychologist told the court what the Menendez boy Erik told him, as in a professional, confidential manner, and then it turned out that the psychologist himself had major psychological issues. He was
uncommon. Sorry.
Yes, it's not unusual. No offense. My husband was a psychiatrist, but
we all have issues.
Yeah. I don't even hear these things that my mother says, but
a therapist, that a person claimed that the therapist raped her, the same therapist.
Wow.
And he was disbarred. This guy called Jerome Oziel, who
Oziel in Serbian, Oziel and Northern Ireland nincompoop. Question: what was your behavior in prison? I'd assume any psychopathy in their character, John, would have revealed itself. Would a deep psychoanalysis of the brothers be key in making any next decision? I mean, what Sarah just alluded to this. They've been model inmates. Does that tell you anything? They both got married. I think one of them was married twice now. Carm, mid-sentence, she loves to interrupt me. It's unreal.
7 years they were in therapy.
In prison?
In prison. With a very successful therapy, with a good therapist.
Carm, I could be in therapy for 37 years. It wouldn't make a difference. I'm asking you, John, if it would still be hopeless. But I mean, what can you tell about their character, if anything, from their behavior in prison?
Nothing really. I mean, you can tell that they follow the rules well. I mean, really, and at the end of the day, isn't that really what we want people to do? Right? In society, don't we just want them to follow rules? I mean, prison is just a microcosm of intensity. It's not really, to think that there's rehabilitation that happens in prison that's a far-fetched idea. But is there psychopathy involved? I don't think that there's psychopathy involved. Then that can actually be evaluated. So I'm not seeing anything where there's psychopathy. And I'm not psychoanalytic, so I'm not going to say that someone needs to go under psychoanalysis. I do think that someone should undergo therapy, but I also think everyone needs to undergo psychotherapy. So we haven't learned anything really about them based on their behaviors in prison.
And also people who are confined and detained. And I mean, what choice do you have? You can't really.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, whenever you try to commute a sentence, the argument that prosecutors make is, well, of course he's done well, because what else could he do? Like he's got to do well in this setting.
Yeah.
This question is really interesting about Alan Dershowitz.
I thought I was going to say Carm is terrified of being sued, and now she has good reason. So this person has commented a few times, and I believe this is true, that he actually wrote a book about the abuse excuse, according to GX. Alan Dershowitz, your friend, Carm.
My friend is not my friend.
Slandering and mocking the brothers. Today we know that Alan was a close accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein.
So I want to know what close accomplice means. Is this person, because Dershowitz, I believe, represented Epstein in the Florida case where he went unscathed, right?
I believe so.
Where the prosecutors did not prosecute him, and there was, the whole blame game that happened afterwards. Is that what she means by accomplice? Because no, he's not an accomplice. He's an attorney, and he did his job very well. I mean, that's what I would do for my client. But or does she mean that, Alan Dershowitz was one of the many guys around Epstein who was engaging in the same conduct, which I still don't have really any proof of that. I'm not a fan of Alan Dershowitz. I think he's.
Well, I don't think it's the same conduct if he was picking 16-year-old girls that weren't his daughters. It's a little bit a mild version of abuse than do it to your 6-year-old son.
Now, Carm, the hate mail is going to come gushing in. Carm, you cannot.
Carm is hardcore.
Right on that. Right up. Bridget writes, Carm is no truer statements ever been said. And then John Della Torre.
I have a thought.
Oh my God, Sunday nights are difficult for me.
I know
difficult.
He cannot share the limelight.
John, what do you charge an hour? Because are you free for the entire week? Go ahead, Carm. Interrupt me one more time.
No, but what I was thinking when we were talking about that they were in prison, that they are exemplary prisoners. I was thinking that they were groomed for this prison because they were exemplary. They had to behave as children. All through their childhood, they had to be towing the line and be very not deviate and obey orders in order to survive.
Sure.
And then they can, since they went to jail at the age of 18 and 21, maybe they carried over this way of dealing with the world by just playing the towing the line, doing.
Well, it's interesting here because Misty Nolan says they were model children too, weren't they? They were kind of like the all-American children. That's an interesting comment. But John Della Torre, if Sarah hired you as an expert witness on this case, and then the state had their way with you and said, well, okay, they were sexually abused and they killed their father, but why did they kill their mother too? As an expert witness, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think what I would say is, what's the difference between their mother and their father? I mean, other than the person being abused, isn't the mother just as culpable because she wasn't there to protect him?
Right.
And then they're going to interrupt me and say, that's not what I asked, or I'm asking a different, what I'm going to say is that in their minds, they weren't two separate people. They were both a couple that were complicit in the abuse that they experienced. So you couldn't kill one without the other.
Interesting. Old lady Snoop.
And I think they looked to the mom to protect them. And then she would just whether it was denial or whatever, she would just drag, and, she would grab I think it was Lyle, grab his arm and pull him and basically tell him to shut up. I mean, it's not what you expect, So I don't know though. Is that more anger at the parent than it is fear?
Well, so if that question, Dr. Della Torre, isn't that more anger than fear? Once again, I'm going to say, what's the difference? In order to engage in the act, you have to build yourself up in order to do it. Or for the most part, you're just going to stay cowering in a corner. Right. When the two brothers revealed the abuse to each other, that further imbued them with the necessary emotional effort that they needed. And yes, part of it is going to be angry, but wouldn't anybody who is experiencing sexual abuse feel anger towards the person being that was their abuser? I mean, that just makes the most sense.
Sarah, you better hire John after this. Old lady Snoop.
Where
Carm-
are you based, John?
San Antonio.
Everywhere.
This everywhere.
Too.
Today, everybody's everywhere.
Old lady Snoop. Carm came proper and prepared today. I am paying attention. I'll bet most of us are so. So let's not forget to hit the like button. How about that? That's very nice. John, how about this comment, John? Because we've heard this. Grown men can simply walk away. They like the money. I'm 53 years old, and there could be an argument made that I am in arrested development. These guys were basically kids. One was a teenager still. The other was 21. What about this comment in your eyes about just being able to walk away?
Grown men doesn't mean grown men, right? It is certainly possible that while they might have been physically bigger and physically stronger, that doesn't mean that they actually had the wherewithal to use that power in any way. And as a matter of fact, if they've been abused for that long a period of time, well, all they've learned is that they never had any power. They never had any agency. They never had any authority. These guys, so it's one of those things that I think we genderize abuse victims to say, well, if you're a man, you can never be abused because you're just physically stronger. The reality is that you can be physically abused. You can be sexually abused. Those things can happen. And the emotional and psychological consequences are not any different than it would be had you been a woman. It's just different now because society places expectations of how you should be because you're a man.
And Sarah asking if they are eligible for parole. I think they're life in prison. They're LWOP, life without parole, unless something happens with this habeas corpus writ. Carmela, you've raised your hand.
Okay, I would like to bring up another subject that will certainly come up earlier or later, and that is
The king's coronation.
No.
Okay.
That comes after this.
Sorry.
No.
She usually takes us way off track like that. So
No,
I was just guessing.
I like to take us off because they will say, well, why did they buy Rolex watches? And
Right.
why did they live it up? And, you know, this is also related to the anger in my book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving my reasoning, and I would like to hear your reasoning. I think because that was one other expression of anger and showing that they are now not powerless. And they were also immature and kind of naive and stupid to do this at that point in life, which made it like, look, the optics was terrible. And this will also come up if there is ever a retrial, the way they behaved right after the murder.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big argument, Carm, that they were on a spending spree, that they did this for financial gain, which is a very persuasive motive, even though you don't have to prove motive for murder. But I'm wondering if does abuse stunt your growth the way that, for example, addiction does?
I mean, sure, it can. There's nothing to suggest that you'd be a fully functioning, fully well-developed individual if you experienced sexual abuse or abuse of any kind, particularly by your primary caregiver. There's nothing to suggest that you're going to be okay. So it's certainly possible that you would engage in highly inappropriate acts simply because you don't technically know better.
Yeah,
and but it was long term. It was long term.
What?
Long term?
It was long term from birth, literally almost from birth. Yeah.
I mean, and once again, the longer the abuse goes, the more stunted that you're going to be. So, yeah, and it's also one of those things. It's kind of like, you know, here's my opportunity to do finally what I get to do. So I'm gonna just spend all kinds of money like any kid would. And that's the thing, is that we're viewing them as if they were fully functional, you know, adult males. They weren't. If they were abused, they showed some level of emotional stuntedness. If all of this is just stuff that they fabricated, then of course they're going to spend the money because they're criminals, right? And criminals spend money. So either way, they were going to do something that they shouldn't have done.
And Sandra says, if you were sexually abused and you murdered your parents, spending sprees and partying is what happens Next, it's hard to tell sarcasm in a comment sometimes, but I think she's being serious. And I think Carm's point is that it could be a normal kind of trigger reaction out of extreme anger. Or
right, but I also don't want people to think that I will come up with a psychological excuse for any behavior. I won't do that. If I'm asked the question as to why someone would do that, I have a reason. But again, I'm not condoning the behavior that they did. They did kill their parents. Why they killed their parents, that's the thing that I think the jury needed to hear from the beginning. And when they did hear it, it was tossed, there was a toss up between what they should have done as a verdict. I'm not trying to condone or excuse or justify anybody's bad behavior, including murder. I'm just saying that we should take the step back and really take a look critically at why do people do what they do in order to understand what should we do about them.
Yeah, and
it's 35 years later now. It's not like we are discussing if we should let them out of jail like a week after they get there.
They've been in prison, I believe, 20
Okay, I changed my mind. I want your mom on my jury. I changed my mind.
No, I suffer from I'm very permissive and very kind of.
You're weird. Sort of liberal like that, Carmen. We're gonna. By the way, they say that Dr. Ann Burgess, who is a friend of the show, and the show Mindhunter on Netflix is loosely based off of her work, who is 3 years older than my mother and still teaches, works full time. Carm,
we met her here.
Yes, she apparently testified or gave some sort of expert testimony in the first trial and really believed the brothers had been victimized. So I'm going to reach out to her and see if maybe she would like to come on to discuss this. She is a brilliant mind.
We were invited to be guests on somebody else's podcast, and this person's father murdered the mother when he was 12-year-old.
Who's the Jody Plowshay case?
11.
Yeah.
But no, I have a point to make there. Joel asked him, how does he feel about his father, who is in jail ever since?
Oh, this is different. Yes.
No, but
this is not Jody Plowshay. This is Collier Landry.
Collier Landry. And he answered, Joel asked him, how do you feel about your father? And the father is in jail now 30 years. And he said, I love my father. And the Menendez boys, when they were interviewed by Barbara Walters a bunch of years ago, when they were in jail already for, I don't know, a dozen years, they also said that they love their parents. It's a very confusing, emotional.
Very confusing because you're looking at this. You don't want to believe that this person is inflicting harm on you because you love them, because they're your father or whatever, mother, father, whatever it is.
But that's also part of the abuse, right? Yeah. That's also part of the cycle of abuse.
Yeah. And John, I want first. Knightwood asks, "Is there a battered man syndrome?" Before you answer that, Carrie says, "I just watched Erik's testimony on Court TV, where John appears often, where he talked to the mom's mental, emotional abuse as well, making him stay in a closet and calling him gay. So there was obviously a lot of intense mental abuse. But what about this? Is there, battered man syndrome as there is a battered woman syndrome?"
No, not in the way that it's documented and researched for battered woman. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't generalize it to men, right? That you couldn't use those things that we understand when it comes to the abuse of women in intimate partner and domestic violence and apply it to men or any individual, right? It doesn't matter, man, woman, right? You could use it for really anybody.
GX says Kitty Menendez was not weak, all caps. Her niece described her as very strong, forceful woman. She played a huge part in this. And so Sarah Zari, the documentary is called The Menendez Brothers and Menudo, Boys Betrayed. It is on Peacock, where you can see it, where Carm By the way, she's very proud of herself. She figured out how to.
I'm bragging. If you didn't notice.
She usually calls the IT director, aka my wife, for anything technically related, but she was able to watch it all on her own on her computer. So that was a big moment.
I got it on Peacock, and I think I got a little passionate and paid like 3 times the $4.99 before I finally got it.
So, Sarah, Lyle says after this documentary came out and they were asked about it, he says, I always hoped and believed, Erik is saying this actually, I always hoped and believed that one day the truth about my dad would come out, but I never wished for it to come out like this, the result of trauma that an other child has suffered, meaning the guy from Menudo. So just back to wrap this up now, is there possible that this petition goes through the court and number one, a judge says they've served their time, I'm vacating this sentence. That's option one. Is there also the possibility that he says, let's have a retrial? And now the state would have to decide, I guess Los Angeles, California, would have to decide if they wanted to try them again, right?
No, that's double jeopardy. They can't be tried again.
Okay, so then the only option is to...
They either deny it or they grant it. And if the writ, and if they grant the writ, then there are a few different outcomes. Generally speaking, not just in this case, but the sentence could be modified, or they could be released. And so in this case, I think they would just be released because they've done so much of the time. I think it's 28 years or something already.
Annette Toohey says groovy glasses to Sarah Azari, but that is followed up, not to burst your bubble, Sarah, by old lady Snoop, who says, OMG, yes, those glasses are everything, second only to Joel's now. So don't get ahead of yourself. So in case you haven't figured it out, the guy in the blue shirt is a very sharp mind, quickly becoming a big friend of the show. Dr. John Delatorre, he is a PsyD, a licensed psychologist. As he says, he is ubiquitous. He is all over, everywhere, all at once, kind of like Superman. He's also a psychological analyst for television news and court shows like Court TV. John, you're not a lawyer, so let me ask you a legal question. Do you think these guys see freedom? Do you think that the judge will have compassion, empathy, and let these guys out of prison after all this time?
No, I'm not a lawyer, but that's a law degree. That is right there. I have a law degree. No, I'm not a lawyer.
Who knew?
Yeah. I think it depends on what you mean by freedom. Because I think the truth is that I think they already see freedom, even behind bars. I think they already see it. Whatever happens as a result of this writ, I think they're already in a place where they are comfortable with who they are and what they've done with their lives.
Well, are you talking about the truth will set you free kind of situation, that now there's a letter and then there's this other person that was also molested by their dad? I think on some level there's not to be literal because I don't know your world, but there's psychological freedom in that, knowing that you're believed and you're not crazy. You're like, it's hard to sit there and prosecutors argue that you're lying. Nobody should believe you. It's an excuse, and not feel gaslit, frankly. And so I think there is a level of freedom, and even after all these years, knowing that, wow, there's other people, and there's a letter that I had written, and I think, but I do think they deserve to be out. I think we're done. I mean, they paid their dues.
Sarah Azari, if you couldn't tell, she is a high-profile criminal attorney with some of the best glasses in the business, based out of LA, although she's always on a plane somewhere. She has decades and decades and decades of experience.
That old.
She still looks like she's 25. I just got Me Too'd for saying that. Sarah's also been a media legal analyst across platforms. You can see her many nights on News Nation. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but you can see her there many nights. Tiffany Knox says, even if the letter was found, it is not proof. It's just a letter, which we'll get to in a second, Sarah. But look at this. Hey, Carm, this is your Sunday. Hugh Hefner, really, of all people, Hugh Hefner gets you, Carm. This is your Sunday, and look at the high numbers. You're cranking it out with the right case instead of wrong topics affecting your numbers.
No, this is
John
I have to explain. Can
Delatorre,
I
she's a
explain?
little bit of a narcissist, and she
I am.
goes and watches and listens to all her shows, and then she checks her numbers. She checks her
But
numbers.
he sets me up.
I
We are
set her
told-
up.
He sets me up every Sunday night. He picks, tonight is okay, but sometimes he picks some very far out esoteric topic that has nothing to do with what we discussed before, and where people are interested in the other topic, not the topic we are discussing. And then he shows it to me that his numbers are higher than the Sunday night.
So basically, your son is
Yeah.
bougie and manipulative.
Yeah.
And manipulative.
Yeah.
What?
The kids call that
and
gaslighting now.
Yes,
The kids call that
bougie,
gaslighting.
bougie and
Guys,
manipulative.
I have to leave pretty soon, but
Sarah, we're
We are
letting you
all
go.
leaving.
Last
We are
thing, do
all-
they
we are all
do they
leaving.
get vacated? Are they allowed to go? And one other thing, tell Chris Cuomo my mother says his muscles are getting too big. She wants him to stop working.
really, I think the muscles are. I won't say it here.
I don't want you to get me
He
too.
will kick my ass. Yeah, no.
Do these guys see real freedom? Do they get out of prison?
Do I think they will?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I listen. I think it's a very strong writ. I mean, I really do, and I think that there's a high possibility that it would get granted. But I haven't seen the DA's response, right? So I wonder what they're going to come up with besides the regular stuff.
Yes,
But do they have
exactly.
something that is new as well? I don't know.
Carm, when you whisper, can
No.
I say something?
No,
Everyone
no.
hears
They
it. There's
are
a microphone.
I know. I didn't whisper. The
Sarah's
writ
late
was
to dinner.
written- The writ is written in California, right?
Yes.
The case.
Yeah.
So we also have to consider, like you made a joke about Florida. I don't know how does the fact that it's happening in California impact this case.
I mean, we're a pretty liberal jurisdiction. Look, we just convicted Harvey Weinstein. That's not a child case, but still,
It's abuse.
we are very protective of victims of abuse. Whatever judge this is assigned to, I imagine it would go first to the trial judge. I don't know if that judge is still on the bench, but maybe gone for whatever reason. But I think that that judge or whoever this is assigned to would have had decades of experience in how the abuse is played out in the court system and how we view it today. It's hard to set all that aside. And then you have these two defendants coming in and showing corroboration of their testimony. I mean, that alone is persuasive, So I don't know. I've only done federal cases in Florida, but I imagine you're a more conservative state than California in terms of state law. But I think it couldn't be in a better place. I would say LA, New York. These are the places where I think we have more tolerance for things like this, and we get it, and we're protecting victims.
My 2 cents, it's a good thing for the Menendez brothers that it's California. A better chance of getting off. Angela says, America loves Carm and Joel. Carm gets top billing, of course. Carm is an overachiever. We love you, Carm. And we'll end on this. Shame on you, Joel. Shame on you, Joel. I'm a terrible son, I know.
They always say, shame on you, Joel, and the poor little mommy.
Yes. Everyone, love you. We'll be back tomorrow night with Lori Valadabel.
I stole this from Joel. I love you, America.
Love you, San Antone, as they say. Love you, LA. Love you, New York City. Until next time. Until tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Thanks.